We all know how the tale of Red Riding Hood goes, don't we? Girl goes through forest to get to Grandma's house, meets a wolf, he finds out where she's going, he goes and eats the grandma, climbs into bed pretending to be her. What big eyes, ears, teeth you have. Wolf eats girl. Passing woodsman comes and kills wolf, rescues girl and grandma, happily ever after. Sure, if you want the sanitised ending. Some versions of the tale don't have the girl and grandma being rescued at all. Because if you think about it, a wolf isn't going to comfortably swallow two human beings whole, but devour them fairly thoroughly and messily. Some versions have the woodsman cutting the victims out of the wolf, then filling the wolf with stones, so that when he wakes up and tries to move, he's suffocated by the weight of the stones. Not the version you read in kindergarten. Similarly, the movie Frozen is nothing like the Snow Queen, on which the story is very loosely based. There is no mention of a troll's mirror smashing into 1,000 tiny shards of ice, and one shard corrupting the heart of an innocent boy, making him run away from his sister. Funnily enough, one of the weapons the sister uses to overcome adversity is prayer. You won't find that in Frozen. Disney cleaned up The Little Mermaid because, of course, the Little Mermaid drowns herself in the end. Amazing how many stories get sanitised. But I wonder if such treatment loses the punch and intention of the original plot. The reading we have today from the Gospel of Mark is in fact one of these sanitised treatments of the original text. It's the culmination of a number of authors who thought it would be somehow more appealing, more comforting, more poetic to add an Ascension story to the end of Mark. Considering the original Gospel text was compiled about 60 to 70 AD, and the appendix to the final chapter was added a couple of hundred years later, after the other three Gospels were written, it may be a case of keeping up with the Joneses. That is, all the other Gospels have a resurrection and an ascension. But the other Gospel authors were writing at different times for different communities and ultimately aimed to convey their own unique theological points through the stories they conveyed. These authors had a clear reason in mind why they wanted to illustrate the Ascension. Their conclusions were solid and reasoned. The people who added to the end of Mark seemed to be just tying up loose ends. Mark doesn't need to have a happy ending tacked on, because if you look deeply enough into the text, there is already a happy ending in place. Flip back a moment to the start of Mark's Gospel, and you'll find something that lends itself to the main theological point of the original ending. The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, Son of God. So from the start we know that this will ultimately end positively. I mean, what interest would there be in stringing an already oppressed people along with a 16-chapter-long joke? That was Mark's audience, a poorly educated, lower-class people whose culture and life had been lorded over by a totalitarian rule of the Roman Empire. This was a people in dire need of hope. This wasn't just a matter of good news. It had to be the good news. The news that God had not forgotten his people after all this time and all this hardship. The good news of Jesus, the new Yeshua, the new spiritual leader of Israel. the good news of Jesus Christ. They knew that Christ meant Messiah, the chosen one they believed to be coming. Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The new leader, the new Messiah. And now a statement on the nature of God. Here was a God who brought his spiritual offspring, and therefore the vital part of himself, to come to his people and deliver them. This was precisely the good news the people needed, the good news of salvation. Then the text quotes Isaiah, saying, "See, I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way." We know this to be John the Baptist, the holy man, apart from all other holy men, who would be chosen by God to point to his Messiah. The voice of one crying out in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight." The onus is now on us, the people, to make straight the path of the Lord. Make things easy, make things accessible for the Lord. Now, this is where we start to see the makings of a happy ending. You see, the Ascension is already in the Gospel of Mark without the appendix. But it's not an event that involves clouds and mountaintops. Mark is the Gospel of immediacy, of imminence, of immanence with an A. Prepare the way of the Lord, a statement which is bookended in chapter 16 with the statement from the angel, "He has been raised. He is not here. He is going ahead of you to Galilee, and there you will see him." The women at the tomb are right to be scared, for this is a confronting, perplexing turn of events. The link between the beginning and the end is not clear at first, but requires an awakening of one's mind and soul to the nature of this message. The point that Mark is trying to make is that Jesus has ascended, but not in a picturesque upward fashion. Jesus has ascended from death. He has ascended from what was thought to be purely to be the body and into full humanity, which of course also embraces full divinity. He has ascended from our nature to his true nature, such that we feel the imminence, and the immanence with an A, of his ascension. That is, he did not appear to crowds, but the resurrection and ascension appearances in Mark can only be suggested because they manifest individually. In fact, Mark writes not long after Paul, whose own experience of the risen Christ was not unlike the experience that Mark is trying to convey. It is an immanent or inward experience that works on the hearts of all who accept it, changing those hearts and manifesting as an outward proclamation through our words, our deeds of love and charity. We experience the nature that Jesus has assumed, has ascended to, by responding to how he ascends for each of us. That is the path we need to make straight. The path that allows Jesus to ascend in us, bringing alive the kingdom of God he came to proclaim. The ascension of Jesus in Mark is however we experience it in our own lives. We are faced, even on a daily basis, with the empty tomb, the dread that things will go back to how they were. until we, like Paul, like the other disciples, experience that he is risen and we can rise with him. The happy ending to Mark is that when we make that path straight for the Lord, when we open our thinking, our doing, our being to him, we experience him risen as only we can. There's no book, fact, or fairy tale that can pin down just what it feels like for God to touch your life in the midst of trials. Only you can hear the voice crying out in the wilderness, as that wilderness will be different for everyone. But the wilderness is neither the end nor the entirety of the text. It is the beginning that opens us to what comes next in the story. The kingdom, the victory of the Messiah in your life, amplified by the way you convey that victory to improve the experience of others. If you make his path straight, if you allow him to guide your living, the Lord will ascend to his kingdom, to a state of being grounded in justice and mercy. And in our own way, beyond the adequacy of human prose, we will ascend with him, happily ever after.